Welcome back to the Ragged Coast Kitchen. I'm Kate, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make very easy bittersweet chocolate truffles. This is a great candidate for your holiday treat tin, or if you just want to make truffles for a special dinner party or as a gift to give to somebody. This is a really easy recipe with just a few ingredients. The trick here is using a quality chocolate because truffles are mostly chocolate. So the truffle is chocolate ganache, and ganache is a mixture of basically chocolate and cream. We're gonna add a little butter just to give it a nice smooth mouthfeel, but basically chocolate ganache is chocolate and cream. And so the main ingredient is your chocolate. So make sure it's chocolate that you like. You don't have to use bittersweet. You can use milk chocolate, white chocolate, any kind of chocolate you want. The trick will be to adjust the amount of your cream. And we'll talk about that as we get into this recipe. I also use a food processor for this recipe. You don't have to use a food processor. If you don't have one, don't worry about it. You can do this in a bowl with a whisk or a rubber spatula. I just find that particularly with a chocolate truffle that we're making a very firm ganache for, sometimes the food processor makes it a little easier to emulsify. So let's get into it. I've placed in the food processor 12 ounces of our 71% bittersweet chocolate. If you're not using a 71% or this particular bittersweet chocolate, just keep in mind you might need to adjust the amount of your cream based on the cacao content of your chocolate. I've also put in 1 ounce, that's 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. My butter happened to be cold, so I cut it up into a little bit smaller chunks. Really, you want your butter to be about room temperature, the same temperature as your chocolate. But if it's coming right out of the refrigerator, no worries, just chop it up in small pieces. All right, I'm gonna put this on the base, and my cream has just about heated to boiling. And I have 7 ounces of heavy cream in here. We're gonna pour it over the ingredients in the food processor. And because we're depending on just the heat from the heavy cream to melt all this chocolate and butter, you wanna put the lid on this to keep the heat in and let it sit for 1 full minute. And that will do most of the work for us. The ingredients have been sitting at about a minute. I'm gonna go ahead and start my food processor on low. We're gonna give that a good scrape. Get all the chunks down in there. And we're going for like a pretty thick pudding consistency. Looking pretty good. That was graceful. I might add just a little bit of cream in there. Taking the temperature of my ganache, ideally we want to agitate our ganache at about 90 degrees. This feels warm to me, warm to the touch. So I know that it's over 90, right? Because our body temperature is what? 98.6. So if this is feeling warm to my hand, I can safely assume that it's over 90 degrees. And that's fine. That's why I put a little bit of cold cream in there to cool it down a little bit. We agitate this ganache when it's too hot or too cool, it will start to separate. And that's what's kind of happening here right now, kind of splitting. And this is exactly why I like to use a food processor. So we're gonna let this run until our ganache comes together. Complete transparency here, it's probably gonna look worse before it looks better, but we're just gonna roll with it. Part of chocolate making is fixing your screw ups and knowing how to do it. And this is, ganache can be very tricky, especially when you're working with high cocoa content chocolate. There's just not enough cocoa butter in there to really do what we want it to do. There's so much cocoa mass that it's really making our emulsion a little more difficult to come together. So we learn to be patient and we learn to trust the process, which is what we're doing now. This is important. This will happen to you. Your ganache will break. I'm just going to encourage you to stick with agitating. It will get there, I promise. Okay, let's take a look at this. As you can see, it's really coming together nicely. We're gonna make sure that it's not super greasy. See how it's kind of sliding off the bowl there? That just means while we're emulsified, it's not a super stable emulsion. So we're just gonna let it go a little bit longer. This ganache is in perfect shape. So we are going to scrape this ganache into a cake pan. This is how I like to set my ganache, is on a wide flat surface rather than in a bowl. That way we can pretty much ensure that it's coming to temperature all at the same time. A bowl will work too. I just prefer this method. And then we're gonna cover it with a sheet of plastic wrap. And you can either let it sit at a cool room temperature overnight, or if you're in a little bit more of a hurry, you can put it in the refrigerator. It'll just really firm up super solid so that when you are ready to roll your ganache, you'll need to let it just warm up for about 10 minutes at room temperature. So this is going in the fridge, and we'll be right back with a nice firm ganache to roll our truffles. We have taken our cake pan of set ganache. I've actually put this in the refrigerator, so it's quite firm, but I think it's soft enough for us to work with. We're going to roll this into balls. You can see that I've put plastic wrap right on the surface of it. I'm gonna take that off, and you'll see this nice firm ganache. If you have a tiny cookie scoop like this, I recommend using one of these. It doesn't make it so that we don't have to roll them by hand, but it does make the process a little easier, especially getting the ganache out of the cake pan. So here we go. And so to get like the one finished, beautiful truffle, it takes like 5 days. And we're gonna finish these by rolling them into perfect little balls. It helps to have the surface of the rolled balls be as smooth as possible, because we're going to be coating these in chocolate. Do you have to coat these in chocolate? No, you do not. You could roll these in cocoa powder, roll them in sugar, nuts, whatever, and be done. But if you do that, then I would highly recommend storing them in your refrigerator. We are gonna coat these in chocolate so that we don't have to store them in the refrigerator. They'll be good for about 2 weeks at a cool room temperature, as long as it's out of the sun and out of the heat, in an airtight container. So this is something that I might put in a holiday cookie tin as sort of a extra special, non-traditional holiday gift, instead of shortbread cookies or something like that. You might ask, why does coating them in chocolate make them shelf stable for 2 weeks? That is an excellent question. Ganache is made with cream, which is a dairy product, which is very susceptible to bacterial growth. However, when we incorporate cream into a stable emulsion, the water molecules in the cream are held in stasis, basically, so they're not moving around. It's the moving around of those water molecules that attract bacteria. The emulsion helps those water molecules slow way down, and as long as they're not exposed to air, we can keep them stable for a week or 2. So the way we keep them from air is by coating them with pure chocolates. And it's best if the chocolate is in temper. 1, it'll look good, and 2, it probably won't crack and allow air to come in and promote bacterial growth. That's why creating an airtight shell of chocolate around this ganache helps us keep it at room temperature for a couple of weeks. Okay, our truffles are ready to be coated in chocolate. I'll be back in a minute. At this point, you should have melted and tempered, I say about 2 pounds of chocolate. You can get away with less than that, but I like to have a nice pool of chocolate to work with. If you are new to tempering chocolate, make sure you watch my video on how to temper chocolate, but that's what we're gonna be working with right now. So this is our 56% dark chocolate couverture that we're working with, and I use it because it has a little bit of added cocoa butter to it, which keeps it nice and fluid at a lower temperature. The first thing we wanna do is do a really thin base coat on our truffles. So the way I do that is by putting a little pool of chocolate in my hands. And I do recommend gloves. Sometimes chocolate feels weird on people's hands, so this is just a good way to not have that weird feeling. I just roll it in the melted chocolate right in my hands and then roll it out on the parchment. And I can do this about 3 or 4 times until I want to replace my chocolate. So I'm just going to scrape that excess chocolate on the side of the bowl. Why am I doing that? Because my body temperature is warmer than our tempered chocolate, which is at 90 degrees. And if I heat the tempered chocolate higher than 90, it will fall out of temper and it won't look nice. It'll still taste great, but it won't look nice. Roll in the puddle of chocolate and then roll it right off your fingertips on to the waiting parchment. So we've got our base coat on our truffles. Now we're gonna put our beauty coat on, but I just wanna say that at this point, once you have your base coat on your truffles, you could roll these in cocoa powder and be done. And I'm gonna show you what that looks like. It actually looks great. But I understand that it's not everybody's thing. Again, I'm just rolling them. And you'll see that this is kind of the classic truffle. So it actually looks like the thing that grows in the ground. And this is why we call them truffles, is because traditionally they look like this. These should keep at a cool room temperature in an airtight container for about 2 weeks. All right. So now we're gonna coat them in our second layer of chocolate. You can use a dinner fork or one of these little guys. This is called a dipping fork. You can get these at any, gourmet kitchen store or online or wherever. It's basically a fork with very thin tines that won't have the chocolate cling to it. And that's why we use them. In an ideal situation, I might have a shallower bowl to use so that I'm not reaching down in here, but there's a way that we can deal with that. You're keeping this chocolate at temperature for a while. So one thing I really recommend is keep a hairdryer in your kitchen that you only use in your kitchen, that it doesn't go back and forth between the bathroom and the kitchen. It just stays in the kitchen for culinary uses. I love my kitchen hairdryer. There's so many things you can do with it. You can soften butter, you can soften buttercream, you can keep chocolate in temper without burning it or overheating it. I actually don't have my hairdryer with me today, the studio that we're videoing in, so I am sort of going back and forth between a pot of hot water, which you can do. It's just not as safe. All right, so I'm gonna take my base coated truffle and plop it right into the chocolate, and I'm gonna take my fork and cover it and then scoop it up on the rim of the bowl, give it a good scrape, and then roll it on to the parchment. Now, while the chocolate is still wet, you can decorate it with chopped nuts, nonpareils, anything you can think of. Coconut sprinkles, colored sugar, but you have to do it while it's still wet so that it sticks to the chocolate. These are looking super great. So the finish you're looking for is this nice satin, shimmery, non-streaky, non-spotted finish. Keep an eye on the temperature and the fluidity of your chocolate. Definitely gets thicker as it cools. So if it's too thick, take your hairdryer to it just for a few seconds and then give it a really good stir. And we're gonna plate those up after they set and give them a nice little gander before we say goodbye. So once the chocolate has set on the parchment, we can put them on our plates and serve them up. You could also put these as a treat in your holiday treat tin and give them as gifts. Again, they will keep for about 2 weeks at a cool room temperature, out of the sun and out of the heat. If you have questions about this recipe, go ahead and comment below. If you liked this video and want to see more content like this, subscribe to our channel. And we'll see you next time in the Ragged Coast Kitchen.